So I share my story with you guys. I was born and raised Muslim in the United States. So I didn't come from another country. My parents came in the 70s. My dad came when he was in his 20s. And I don't know if, how many of you guys know Elvis? His music, right? So my dad came to the U.S. the day Elvis died. And so he steps off the plane and he looks at the newspapers and they all say the king is dead. And my dad's like, king? I thought they had a democracy here. And that is kind of how my parents came. They came in total ignorance of what the world was like here in the U.S., but they came because they knew they could receive freedom from oppression. They could receive opportunity, and they could give me and my sister, even though we weren't born yet, they could give us a life of hope and opportunity. See, Islam isn't a monolith, and sometimes we think about other religions that aren't our own as one big entity. But Islam has many schisms and divisions within it. And the sect of Islam that my family came from is heavily persecuted by other sects of Islam. Even today, last year we saw a mosque in Lahore where there were some gunmen who went in and killed 74 other professing Muslims. I have some second cousins who were there in the massacre, and they saw their friends get killed. So this is very real. There's still oppression happening within the Muslim world. And my parents came here to the United States for that freedom of oppression. And quick side note, we need to fight so that we can keep that freedom. So my parents came here for that. And when they were here, they didn't know how, they didn't have anything. My dad came with nothing. He joined the U.S. Navy as soon as he got here. And what they used to do back then, if you went to McDonald's, they used to have like styrofoam containers that they'd give you Big Macs in. And they used to wash those out to keep them as their dishes. Because they literally had nothing. And a lot of Muslims who come from other countries come in that kind of condition. They have nothing, no one to lean on, no support at all. My dad joined the Navy, and he served the Navy, and he served it with his whole heart. So there are Muslims in the military who really are fighting for our nation. In 1983 is when I was born, and when I was born, like all Muslim families, devout Muslim families, my parents raised me immediately from moment number one as a Muslim. The first thing a Muslim child is supposed to hear is the Shahada. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. My father said that in my ear the moment I was born, and he said it in my other ear as well. And then he did the call to prayer in both my ears as well. Then that's standard. And you might ask, Nabeel, are all Muslim families who come to the United States so devout? No. But my mom was the daughter of a missionary. Her father spent his whole life preaching Islam in Indonesia. She was actually born in Indonesia because she was an MK there. So that's the kind of lineage I come from. Her mother was born in Uganda because her father was a lifelong missionary. So I came from a line of Muslim missionaries. And when we're here in the United States, you'll see this from people who feel like they're minorities. You'll see that they learn to defend themselves against the public at large. They learn to to build up fortresses for themselves. And so they live in community. They teach their kids how to define themselves, their identity. And that's what they did with us from moment number one. And so as I'm growing up, I'm praying the 5 daily prayers. I'm reading the Quran. That's normal for Muslims. By the way, even though I was born and raised in the United States, my parents taught me how to read Arabic before I could speak English. So I read the entire Quran in Arabic by the age of 5. I had many chapters of the Quran memorized by that time. In order to read the 5 daily prayers, you have to have parts of the Quran memorized, and I did. Ultimately, I had the last 15 chapters of the Quran memorized, and I was going to learn as much as I could throughout my life. So I was not living this kind of disillusioned, passive, apathetic life. I was living the Muslim life because my parents taught me, Nabeel, when you go into the public realm, it doesn't matter how good a student you are. You could be the best student in your class, but no one's going to see you and say, there's a good student. No one's going to see you and say, there's a good American citizen. They're going to see you, they're going to see your skin color, they're going to see your features, and they're going to think, there's a Muslim. And so you have to defend Islam. Wherever you go, you are an ambassador for Islam. And that's what my mom told me. And she said, if anyone ever tries to share the gospel with you, you need to be able to respond to them. You need to be able to tell them exactly why you are a Muslim and why they should become Muslims. So any sort of evangelical attempt that was thrown at me was immediately turned around into my own da'wah, my own attempt to share Islam. And I remember one very powerful time was when I was junior in high school. It was second bell. I was in Latin, and I was doing my homework for third bell. Y'all know how that is. And the girl in front of me turns around, and she's got this wild-eyed look. And she's like, Nabeel, do you know Jesus? And I'm like, this girl's crazy. Turned out she was on fire for the Lord, but easy to confuse those things. So I'm like, yeah, I do know Jesus. I know Jesus was virgin born. I know Jesus healed lepers. I know he cured the deaf and the blind. And I know Jesus raised the dead. I know he's the Messiah, and I know he's coming back at the end of times to initiate judgment. But I also know he's not God. And she says, what do you mean? What do you mean Jesus isn't God? Of course he's God. You see, I was quoting the things that the Quran had told me, and the Quran tells me all those things about Jesus, but it very clearly delineates the fact that Jesus is not God. And so I told her, look, let me accept the Gospels for a moment. Let me say the Gospels are true. You can quote whatever you want from the Gospels. Where does Jesus say he is God? And she had no idea how to begin to respond. And I said, you really think this is important? She's like, yeah, I do. Yes, Christ is Lord. That's the center of my faith. And I said, but you can't even show me where he said that. And then she says, well, Jesus did say the Father and I are one. And I said, do you think he's claiming to be God by saying that? Because in that same in that same book, the book of John, Jesus says that he prays for the disciples to be one, just as he is one with the Father. Right? So what is he saying? Is he praying for the disciples to be one person, just as he's one person with the Father, or one being even? No, that's not what he's saying. He's praying for the disciples to be unified in their spirit, just as he's unified with the Father. Therefore, we can't say he's claiming to be God when he says, I am one with the Father. He's just unified in his spirit. They're like-minded. That's not a claim to be God. And in fact, if you want to go to the book of John, why not go to the verse where Jesus says the Father is greater than I? He says that, doesn't he? Father is greater than I. How can God say God is greater than God? Doesn't make any sense. And why not go to the other books? What about the book of Mark, where he says he does not know when the end of times is? Chapter 13. He says nobody knows. Not the angels nor the Son, but only the Father. He's drawing a line of differentiation between himself and God, is he not? Jesus doesn't know who touches him in a crowd. Jesus can't perform miracles in Galilee. Read the book of Mark carefully. It doesn't say he did no miracles in Galilee. It says he could do no miracles in Galilee. You're telling me God is impotent? And I was having this conversation with her. She's on fire for the Lord. She wants to share the gospel with many people, but she was entirely unable to respond to the simple question, why do you believe the most central part of your faith?